Afternoon, everybody. Normally, as you know, we have our BPRC seminars on Wednesdays, and there actually is one tomorrow of equal interest to today's. But this is a special seminar on the BPRC because he's a special speaker, and he's got a very special story to tell too. So you can see his name here, and this man, I keep calling him, is Edward, as you can see, and he works at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And he's been there for a long time. He's done first degree there, master's, PhD there. But he also had a postdoc in the University of Fairbanks in Alaska. And one of his loves, maybe his only love, not really, is amoebae. He loves amoebae. Can't imagine why, but he loves amoebae. I did them at school. I never thought of them again after. Anyway, never mind that. And he's going to go to New Caledonia in about 3 days' time to look for amoebae. And everyone he finds is going to be probably the first of science. So it's rather exciting now. But in a way I don't recall, and he'll tell us, he then started looking at honey, as you know, and he got a paper in Science on that very topic, which the world media picked up like mad, actually. And you can imagine why. People care about bees. They think that the bees of the world are declining in number, which they are in some places. Many theories about why. Some say climate change, some say agricultural change, some say general loss of biodiversity, and some say pesticides. And Edward did that work on his honey, which you'll hear about, in the context of people saying that certain pesticides are messing about with bee behaviour and killing some as well. And you might know that in the USA there's a thing called CCD, colony collapse disorder, and they're losing bees in beehives quite rapidly. And again, there are many theories for that. I've just given the first 10 minutes of his talk. I'm sorry about that. Not really. So I think this is a special seminar for the reasons I gave. And I think that paper he got out has really turned the heads of media and pesticide companies all around the world. So let's hear about that. And we hope there'll be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. All right, Edward, so over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So yes, the topic is honey, neonicotinoids, but I don't know how many people actually read abstracts carefully, but if you did, and I know at least one person did here in the room, you probably noted that there was a little typo. And I promise I didn't do this on purpose, but it's a perfect introduction to the main body of my research, which is actually not on honey or pesticides, but on soil amoeba. And so this is the outline of my talk. I'll start to show you, or walk you through my personal research path from soil amoeba to pesticides. And then we'll talk a little bit about neonicotinoids and other pesticides. And then, of course, I'll talk about this survey, which, of course, has policy implications, and the debates are very heated at the moment. And I'll end with a possible countrywide experiment in Switzerland. So first, where I come from. If you're interested in biodiversity, and if you're open-minded enough to consider what high-throughput sequencing of environmental DNA is telling us, you might have seen some papers dealing with this, showing that the bulk of biodiversity is not the macroscopic organism that we all know, but it's actually microbial. And this is just an image for eukaryotes showing all these obscure groups, alveolata, which includes ciliates, for example, and apicomplexan, parasites. All of these groups that are less well studied than macroscopic organisms, except when they're parasites, are actually extremely diverse. So a big unknown diversity. So where do you start? Well, my pet group is testate amoeba. What are testate amoeba? There are free living amoeba. They're not parasites. They produce a shell. The shell is about the same size as a pollen grain, 20 to 200 micrometers mostly. They're common in soil, fresh water, marginally marine. And there are many interesting things despite, in addition to these organisms being absolutely beautiful, of course, because they have shells, their shells can fossilize, and they're actually among the oldest known fossils of eukaryotes. And as such, they're really of high interest for paleontologists and dating molecular clocks of eukaryotic evolution, for example. Only about 2,000 morphological species have been described so far, but diversity is actually much higher as soon as you start doing molecular work and more detailed morphological work, you find new species. How much is known in New Zealand? Well, really not that much. In the second sample that I analyzed, I discovered, this big fat guy here. And the only species that was known was this one. And actually I found 3 different species, and one of which is probably even a new genus. This big one here doesn't branch with the other 2. And then same thing with other species, two quite different morphotypes, also something quite similar to this one, but without the constriction. Anyway, short story is that we have a lot of diversity in New Zealand that is really pretty obvious. Even a beginner microscopist can tell that these things are different, and yet nobody has found this. Different genus, same kind of story. Yeah, we have a little transfer from Mac to PC problem here. But anyway, the short story again is that we need more taxonomists. There's a lot of diversity that is unknown, and especially this is true when we look at the microbial world. The last taxonomic description of testate amoeba in New Zealand dates from 1956, so really that basically means that nobody has been doing any work here for a long time. So if we are to understand what this biodiversity is and what it means, we really need to focus more and invest more on basic taxonomy and biodiversity research. And if we do this more carefully, and this is just one example that I want to show you here, the phylogeographical pattern of one morphological species of amoeba in northern peatlands. And so these are all the samples that we worked on. And as you can see, there's a higher diversity in North America and a lower diversity in Eurasia, signifying that this species probably originated somewhere in North America, and the pattern of diversity is actually could be quite well explained by range contraction expansion of peatlands during ice ages. So we can really start telling some really interesting stories about the diversity of microorganisms and how the historical factors contributed to shaping this diversity. Well, as you all know, in the southern hemisphere, we have quite a different pattern of land versus ocean surfaces. And one of the species that I was presented earlier is actually interesting because its current distribution matches quite well the former Gondwana, with a few exceptions. And you could imagine that it's not too difficult for a species to colonize Central America. This point here is dubious. But so what, the question here is what kind of pattern could we find if we did the same kind of study as we did in the Northern Hemisphere? That's certainly a good model organism. So we have now 3 different also morphotypes here and 3 genetically different species in New Zealand. Well, how many do we have if we start exploring this species more carefully? And that's just for one single morphotype, so you can imagine the kind of diversity that we potentially have. So that's my short presentation of my pet topic. Now you need to understand, well, how from there did I get to pesticides? Well, I've just showed the question of microbial diversity and biogeography, a lot of cool things to be done here. A lot of my work also deals with community composition, community ecology, leading to bioindications, so we can use these amoeba as indicators of environmental quality in peatlands and soil moisture, soil pH, and because they produce shells and the shells are preserved in sediments and in peat, you could use them as paleoecological indicators to reconstruct the long-term environmental changes, just like you do with pollen or other proxies. And they're, of course, being sensitive to environmental gradients, they're also sensitive to pollution, heavy metals, pesticides, and so on. And so you can use them again in terms of bioindication of pollution, but also as models in ecotoxicology. And ecotoxicology, actually, there aren't many, if we look back at that tree of life, or if you look at a eukaryotic tree of life, you will see that, and you place the model organisms that we use in ecotoxicology, you will see that there are very few branches of which we have model groups. So again, the bulk of diversity, we don't know what are the impacts of pesticides on most of the biodiversity at the major group level. And since many of these groups are functionally very important in ecosystems, well, this is a major knowledge gap. So a few intermediate take-home messages: biodiversity, huge diversity is microbial, and it's mostly unknown. All of this diversity, of course, means that we have different species with different ecological optima, functional roles, sensitivity to pesticides. Many of this is, of course, unknown. And paleoecology is, of course, an interesting and vital topic of research when we're dealing with ongoing climate change and other global change biodiversity crisis. Looking at the past tells us or informs us about how significant the current changes are. And I guess in this group we all agree that we are indeed in a major crisis of biodiversity. And another important thing is the time scale. And what I always argue is that we really should be thinking of millennia in terms of sustainability and management, so and biodiversity loss. If we think in terms of 1,000 years, numbers start to mean something quite different if you think just 10 years. Okay, so now moving to the main topic of the presentation, neonicotinoids. What are we talking about? Well, and how did I get into this in the first place? Well, there's an international group, a task force on systemic pesticides from the IUCN, that were working on this topic and compiling all the information from the literature to this synthetic report. And they didn't have many people dealing with soil, so I was approached by these people asking, well, would you like to join? And I said, well, okay, I have more than enough to do, but the topic is certainly interested, and I had already touched a little bit on ecotoxicology, so I was interested in this. And we together worked for several years to compile all the information. And if you know about pesticides, you certainly know that a lot of publications are coming out every day almost on this topic, so it really requires a major effort to try to synthesize this. So we did this and published a series of papers in 2015. And there were other efforts, similar kind of efforts, kind of compiling the information on these pesticides. And this, of course, in the background we have Stephen presented the big concern about the decline of collapse disorders and pesticides and neonicotinoids especially being considered as a probable culprit of these declines. Of course, a lot of controversy there. So if you look at the chemical structure of these compounds, we have a whole family here of molecules. And up here we've got the basic nicotine, which is already a poison. It's a natural compound produced by the tobacco plant to fight plant-eating insects. And all of these molecules are inspired from this basic molecule here, and often with adding chlorine or sulfur atoms to the molecule, making it much more toxic. So the ones highlighted in yellow are the 5 that we actually studied in our study, but there's more and a few more that came out in the meantime. These pesticides have been used for more than 20 years. They were first put on the market in 1995. And so the different colors here show you the different, you certainly can't read these names, but just the colors are the same. So the first one is imidacloprid, which was the first one that was brought on the market, and then some others came in. And if you look at the different countries, the patterns are slightly different. For example, in Japan here we have this purple type here, whatever. The names are just impossible to pronounce. So this is one type that we don't have in the other region. But such information is actually not available everywhere. I mean, in a few cases, we had countrywide information on how much it's actually used. But if you probably can try in New Zealand. I haven't tried getting this information. I certainly tried in Switzerland. This was not available. So this is a problem. We don't even know how much is actually being used. What are neonicotinoids? So they're a broad spectrum insecticide. They're not specific to any organism. They're supposed to be more toxic to invertebrates and insects especially than to vertebrates. And they are mostly used prophylactically as seed coating. So that means that the whole plant is toxic. When the seed germinates, it takes, but it only absorbs about 5% of the pesticide that surrounds the seed. 95% remains in the soil, but still the whole plant is toxic. And then what stays in the soil remains for several months. The half-life depends on the compound, it depends on the type of soil, the climate, and so on. But typically, from 1 year to the next, you will have at least a fair proportion of the pesticide that remains, and so you have build up if you're using these pesticides year after year. But they're also mobile, so they can be leached down the soil profile, they can be eroded down and make their way to waterways. So you have contamination beyond the actual field. So why is this a problem? Well, they are believed to be a primary cause for pollinator decline, including honeybees, wild bees, butterflies, and so on. And of course, over the last 20, 25 years, a lot of research has been accumulating, showing increasingly that a lot of, so you have, of course, direct toxicity, acute toxicity. This is what's been studied first, but then increasingly we've been seeing effects on very low concentrations, so sublethal effects. And effects are such as loss of orientation, depressed immune system, impaired reproduction, and so on. So all of this, of course, eventually affects a colony or an individual or a long time society or the colony. As I said before, it's difficult or impossible to obtain information on uses in many countries, and certainly where there was no data at the global scale on environmental contamination. Also, there are a lot of metabolites. These compounds break down, and there's, of course, less research done on the toxicity of the breakdown compounds of metabolites than on the parent compound. And if you look at just two of these neonicotinoids, you have a huge list of compounds that are, it's a lot of work already to study the parent compound. But if you need to study the effects of every single of these, then it's even another story. So we're dealing with something that's really complex. Even if, with best of intentions, you really want to study the effects of these compounds, even just on honeybees, it's already a huge task. But beyond this, one could ask a first question: is it really wise to apply such broad spectrum pesticides prophylactically? Is this something that we really can be, can we really consider this as a wise type of agriculture? So again, impact on pollinators, bees, colony collapse disorders, and there's a big controversy. The industry will, of course, say that pesticides are, one of many problems, but the major problem is the Aroha mite. And once I was traveling to Brussels, and as I came out of the airport, the plane, and walked down the stairs, I saw this huge ad. It was like 4 stair wide, 10 meters wide. And so here you have the nasty Aroha mite sitting on the head of the honeybee, and it's the real cause of bee colony collapse staring you in the face. Of course, fair enough. That's the stance of the industry. They want to believe in this. I'm not saying that Aroha mites, that's not a problem, but Aroha mite only affects the honeybee. And for example, in Switzerland, we have 650 species of wild bees, and pretty much all of them are declining, and none of them have the Aroha mite. So you have to have another explanation for that other decline. So with this in mind, I'm also scientific director of the botanical garden of Neuchâtel, in addition to being head of the chair of soil biodiversity at the university. And in 2013, we had an exhibition on bees, outdoor exhibition, and we organized a scientific meeting on the topic. And we asked volunteers to bring back honey from wherever they went. Swiss bees travel quite a lot throughout the world. And so we very soon received hundreds of samples of honey from the world. And then we realized that we had really something that was very precious. And so we thought, okay, then what could we do with this? And we had the analytical capacity at the university So we decided to do this study. So we selected honeys from known geographically determined areas. So sometimes you have a honey pot on which it says basically honey from the world or something. So that's not much use for such a study. But in other cases, you have much more information. So priority was given to these samples from on which we had more interesting information, precise information. So we analyzed these samples. When I say we, it's of course one of the co-authors who is an expert analytical chemist, Gayford. And this is the result that we found. 75% of the 198 samples that we analyzed contained at least one of the 5 tested neonicotinoid. For almost half, 45% had 2 or more, and almost half again had concentration, total concentration above the lowest concentration that is known to have negative effects on bees. And then, of course, there's differences among continents and so on. So this was really a shocking result. I mean, we knew that we would find a lot, but 75% is quite a high proportion, especially, I mean, when you look at the world map, and this is the map, the summary result of concentration, so the sum of the 5 neonicotinoids. And, you know, there are very few white dots on this map, and many of these are in places such as, you know, Madagascar, where probably farmers don't even have enough money to buy the pesticides, or Alaska, or places in Russia, or places where you probably have only marginal agriculture and no use of pesticides. So if you remove all of these dots, then you have even less. So that was, of course, the media, of course, picked up on this, and was some massive news last autumn. What about New Zealand? If you look at the map, you'll see that we had actually 4 samples from New Zealand, and all of them were positive. And New Zealand's famous for Manuka honey, and not surprisingly, if tourists travel to New Zealand, what will they bring back? Have this study in mind, or if they want to contribute, they will buy Manuka honey. So 3 of the 4 samples were Manuka honey, and they were also contaminated, which is surprising. Maybe less if you think that, or if you consider that some might actually be blend. There's, of course, Manuka is extremely expensive, and there might be if you're blending Manuka with clover honey, for example, and that contains pesticides, then you find it. You know, that's kind of the most logical explanation. Certainly would like to know more about the pesticide content in honey in New Zealand. So now moving away from neonicotinoids more globally, we analyzed just 5 pesticides. There are about 500 different pesticides that are used worldwide. And then also the adjuvants, or the molecules that are added to the formulation to actually, for example, increase solubility in water and so on. Some of these are actually quite toxic also, so that we often have less information. We actually don't know, or either don't know what they are or know less about the toxicity. And then, as I showed before, the metabolites. So we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of different molecules. They each have their own characteristics, toxicity on different organisms, persistence, and so on. And then the combination of these, we have additional additive or more than additive effects on organisms. And you can just imagine now the complexity of even knowing what's going on. Just characterizing these combinations and then understanding how this will affect over the long term, especially the environment and also human health, because that's something that we certainly need to worry about. And I don't know how many people have read this book. I only read it recently, and it was quite striking to me that when you know what's going on, you know the debate, ongoing debates today, and you realize that in 1962, you know, the situation was not that different. I mean, molecules were different, but the controversy was pretty much the same, and just makes you wonder, well, you know, how much smarter are we actually today? If you know, think of seed coating using broad spectrum insecticide, I don't think it's that much smarter than what was described in Rachel Carson. And of course, a major concern related to biodiversity is this decline in biomass and biodiversity that we see globally. For example, in protected areas in Germany over 27 years, 75% decline in insect biomass. And in the UK, over 10 years, 58% decline of butterflies or in farmlands. And if you've been driving a car in the last decade, you certainly have noticed, I don't know how this is significant in New Zealand, in Central Europe, it's certainly the case. You used to have to wash your windshield very often because it was just full of dead insects. Now you can drive hundreds of kilometers and you very rarely have the same problem. So things are happening, and they're happening actually quite fast. Of course, multifactorial intensification of agricultural pesticides are maybe just one of the problems. And then the impact on human health is, of course, also something of concern. But here too, we're dealing with multifactorial problems. Studies such as this one, looking at the drawings of children in Mexico and low exposure population at the foothills, and then a high exposure population in the valley. And you can see how different these drawings are, implying that you probably have an impact on the development of these children. And of course, there might be other factors than just pesticides. Maybe rich and poor, you can imagine all kinds of things that differ in these two populations. So in terms of, it's not a real experiment, but definitely something that is probably sufficient to raise questions and call for more understanding of what's happening here. So complex systems, complex issues. So do we really understand the effects of pesticides on human health well enough? Are we applying the precautionary principle? Are there alternatives to the general use of synthetic pesticides? These are questions that sometimes you wonder to what extent we're really taking these questions seriously enough. So what are the implications for policy? There's a lot of debate about these things, and now we have an increasing ban of synthetic pesticides in some countries, in some regions. Some countries such as Bhutan or Cuba are pesticide-free. There's partial bans on neonicotinoids in the EU and Switzerland. France has announced that it would ban glyphosate in a few years. So we're seeing a global trend of questioning the use of these pesticides, and public opinion is certainly becoming more aware of the problems. We could really compare this to what happened a few years back when we stopped allowing smoking in public places, or today also the use of single-use plastics. So what about Switzerland? We have about the same proportion of organic farming, I think, in Switzerland as in New Zealand, about 6,000 organic farms in Switzerland. Our farms are much smaller than yours, about 15% of the total number of farms, and this is increasing constantly. And of course, the media are always interested in this topic, and at some point, as I was involved in this international group on neonicotinoids, they asked me for an interview. And of course, at first I was like, well, I'm actually a soil testate amoeba specialist. I'm not really a pesticide specialist. So, but they said, that doesn't matter. We need someone to speak with these things. That's okay. I'll set the limits of my knowledge, and with that in mind, I accept. So, I was on the radio a few times, on television, and then, sure enough, I get a phone call from this guy and says, well, hi, we're a group of citizens, we have no litigation, and we just want to launch a federal initiative to ban all synthetic pesticides. So this is something that's really fantastic in Switzerland. We have this direct democracy system. 4 times a year we vote on any topic, and if 7 citizens sit around the table and say, we want to change the constitution should be changed as such, and you draft a new text. You send it to the central administration. They check to see if it's understandable and if it doesn't cause major problems in terms of law and so on. And if you pass this first test, then you've got 18 months to get your 100,000 signatures. So I thought, okay, well, sure. I first thought that these guys are totally nuts. I mean, it's completely crazy. And then I thought again, I said, well, we've been voting on all kinds of things 4 times a year. We banned minarets a few years ago. Maybe some of you remember this. We're soon going to vote about dehorning cows, because some people think that it's really nice to have cows only bells around the neck or so forth. And so we're actually going to ban this. And I'm quite sure that people will say, yeah, cows should have horns. So, okay, we talked and I met these guys. And I thought, okay, this is actually really a good opportunity to have a debate, a real debate. And if it passes, well, we can test this at a country level. And Switzerland being such a respected country, if we try this and if it works, then I think it may have actually a major impact. So this was some of the documents of the campaign. The campaign was just over at the end of May, and we did get the 100,000 signatures. This is the text in French. Of course, there's no text in English because we have 4 national languages, but not English. So we have to go around, and it has to all be done by hand. So people have to write their name and sign, and then you have to send this back to the municipality, and then they check, and so on. So there's always a percentage of errors and signatures. So the key points is all synthetic pesticides would be banned in Switzerland for agriculture, also land management, public land, and so on. Also banning the import of goods produced with synthetic pesticides. And for us, this was really important because you can't impose such a stringent rule on your farmers and let any import come into the country. So we actually want to protect our farmers as we also impose this new rule. And then we give 10 years after acceptance by the popular vote for this to be implemented, because we felt that 10 years would be needed. We need to develop some new methods. There are a lot of things that can be done, and if a farmer wants to become an organic farmer, it certainly can be done in less than 10 years. But if you said, in 20 years, what would happen? For 10 years, nothing, and then after 10 years, people start waking up. So we thought, let's do it right away. 10 years. So how was this perceived? Of course, strong media interest. Media are always interested in these topics, so that's really great. And we also had a lot of public support. Famous astronomers, award-winning chefs and wine producers and so on. So people started speaking up. Well, we agree with this. Political support across the spectrum. The Greens, of course, but also the extreme right nationalist party. And I think, I didn't talk to these people yet, but of course I was here. But I suspect that they like the idea that we would ban foreign pesticide-loaded things. Switzerland has to be clean. So, for various reasons, different political parties can actually like these ideas. Support from NGOs, timid at first. I think they were a bit afraid of this group and the ideas, thinking it was maybe too crazy. And now, of course, increasing, especially when they saw that we had managed to get the signatures, then suddenly we were support. This lady is the top wine producer in Switzerland in terms of quality. She won many awards, and she strongly supports us. So a big newspaper article with her saying, yes, no problem, we can certainly, it's a challenge, but certainly we can produce wine without using pesticides and good wine. How was this perceived? And the other side, the pesticide producers, of course, didn't like the idea very much. But what's interesting is if you look at what they say and what the Swiss Federal Office of Agriculture and the Farmers Association say, if you take a text, you never can know who actually wrote this, because it's almost the same exactly. And it's one sentence, you can't feed the world without pesticides. The farmers, when you talk to them one-to-one, you get a mixed response. At first they're worried, and they feel also attacked because there are other initiatives such as this one. There's one that was just launched that would really attack them by saying, if you use pesticides or antibiotics, you will use your subsidies. And I know you don't have any subsidies in New Zealand, but in Switzerland, it's something like 65 to 70% of farmers' income subsidies. If we had to fight on the world market, we would have no agriculture left. Wages in Switzerland are so high that just wouldn't be able to compete. So they worried about income and about the work. Yeah, practically, how do I do? Don't have glyphosate anymore and so on. But they also acknowledged the problem, including for their health. Farmers are thus being exposed to pesticides, and they also understood that the idea of this initiative was not against farmers; it was definitely against pesticides, with a concern of safe food, human health, environmental health. So, okay, I just already said that we had more than 140 signatures, well beyond the 1,000 needed, which means that within 3 years we'll have to vote on this. So get ready to produce kiwi fruit and lamb and whatnot without any pesticides for the Swiss market. More broadly, beyond this example. For me, this was, of course, a kind of a journey into what some would call activist, because when you study the diversity of soil testate amoeba, the debates are really pretty limited. You might have, some people that have very strong opinion about cosmopolitan distribution or endemism, or splitters and lumpers and so on, but that's about it. So there I moved into a totally different scale of debate. What's at stake here is really huge. Is this tolerable? Is this something that as we should do as academics? Or should we just, stay in our ivory towers and not say anything? And then is, silence and action, are they not also a form of action? Because you just laissez-faire and you just let things happen. And if you know what's happening, well, maybe you should actually speak up. And I think as scientists, it is our moral duty to, because we have privileged access to information, and all of these issues are really complex, and so I think it is our moral duty to step in and to discuss these things. And so, what are our visions for the future? We all know that we're wrecking this planet. I think a few people would doubt this at the moment. So we have, feeding the world without compromising soil fertility, biodiversity, and human health. I think we'd all agree on this. And for me, it's moving towards an ecologically inspired agriculture. So you hear a lot about biocontrol and things like that. And of course, it's more complicated. You need for each pest to find the right antagonist and so on. It's more complicated than just spraying broad-spectrum pesticides. We also need to repair as much as possible the damage that's being done. And what kind of world do we want to leave to future generations? And banning single-use plastic is certainly. I hope that this movement picks up and really do this. Especially I've enjoyed seeing albatrosses in New Zealand that. Like the next generations also have this privilege. The way it's going is not going to last for long. Carbon neutral economies, and then cultivating the land, fishing the ocean, sustainability. Honestly, I don't really think we have a choice. It's our generation's responsibility to do this and to do it seriously, not just say, oh yes, sure, it's a big problem, but we haven't put in it enough. And maybe this is a good time in New Zealand. I think we recently had a new government in place, and maybe people are hopeful that some things might change. This might actually be, we have maybe a window of opportunity here to do something better. And this Jacinda Arden just gave birth to a new baby, so this is also something that should inspire Kiwi people. Well, let's just think about the future generation. How could we meet these challenges for this new generation, this baby generation? And I don't think that business as usual, or to think that the market will regulate itself for the better of the human health and environmental health. I think that's, some people believe in this, but I certainly don't. And at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of citizens and the people they elect to represent them to act. Often we think as citizens, oh, well, you know, we're powerless, it's the government's responsibility, and yes and no. I think it's it really has to be, everybody should be involved and concerned about this. The government, the elected officials, people we elect are elected for 3 years, 4 years, where this is a really short time span. If you think of 1,000 years, of course, it's ridiculously short. Companies, multinational companies, they're worried about shareholders, they're worried about short-term profits. They're not looking at rarely 10 years, looking at 1 year, 2 years, 6 months. So this long-term perspective is really something I think that we as citizens and the elected the people we elect can and will act in the right direction if they feel the pressure from the people. If there's no voice pushing them in the right direction, they certainly will be more reluctant to take any risk. So that's it. That's my message to you today. And I'd like to thank many people, of course, colleagues in Switzerland, abroad, volunteers who died with the honey samples, funding from the University of Neuchâtel and Gardens, the university to invite me to give this talk, and of course, using colleagues. I'll be leaving Friday morning very early, so this is the end of a really great year. I've enjoyed it very much, and it's a nice window in my life of doing something different, seeing something different. So thank you for this.